It was never anyone at all. There is a corpse, buried in a shallow grave just a few steps too far off the beaten path for search and rescue to find. If the body were alive, it would describe the heavy sheets of dirt overhead as unbearably hot and suffocating. A cloying presence that coats the back of its throat like syrup-sweet traces of peaches and petrichor. Unfortunately, it is dead, and everyone knows that dead things can't feel the warmth of anything but their own cooling bodies. Another step. A string snaps taut, and somewhere, deep under the surface, a hand twitches. There is a collection of bones in the woods, encased in dirt that was once muscle, now decayed and laced through by a network of roots in a pale imitation of the veins that once pumped blood through its corpse. It is calcium and soil and the plants in the ground above, and then he can feel the pull of sinew and fiber as his muscles reform around his bones, tearing the nutrients and minerals back from the dirt he has fertilized so long ago. There is a sparking in neurons that degraded into silt years prior, and the fluttering of something in his chest as his heart blooms to beating, arteries and veins unfurling inside of his weather-bitten form. It jolts to life inside of him, electrified, jump-started 6 feet under with nowhere to go, and the pain of forming a coherent thought hits him as for the first time in 3 years, Courtney Sybil opens his eyes. Good morning, Laconia! It's the beginning of another tragically overcast day here in the Cascade Mountains, and while the sun has just barely begun to peek through the fog, yours truly is already awake and ready to catch you up on all the latest local news. I'm your host, Lichowski, and before we dig into our news for the day, let's start the morning off right with a bit of modern prophecy. So without further ado, here's our very own Jaime Gonzales with the weather. Tell me, Jaime, what's it looking like out there? Pacific Northwest?
Well, it's not magic, but you've pretty much captured it already, Cal. It's currently 54 degrees, a trend which should continue throughout the day and into the rest of the week, with high in the low 60s and low in the low 50s. When the fog lifts, we should be seeing partially cloudy skies with a 60% chance of light rain in the evening, so be sure to pack an umbrella for your way back home from work.
Not for us, though. The last of our scheduled programming wraps up at midnight sharp, and the music keeps going all night long. So if your insomnia is hitting hard, you're always welcome to tune back in. Feel free to send us your witching hour faves via the station's Twitter account, or even call in if you're the old-fashioned type.
As smooth as that transition into shameless promotion was, Cal, I did just explain that the weather's only going to get worse through the night. So you'd better have brought an umbrella, or at least a raincoat. Autumn in Laconia, huh folks? You gotta love it.
Quintessential autumn in the Pacific Northwest, huh? Days like these really make me miss the spring. Man, I miss spring. Not too hot, not too cold, and everything's just starting to come back to life. There's these amazing cherry blossom trees down at UW that bloom in the spring. When you look out over the trees, you can see this gorgeous sea of pink blossoms. If you're ever passing through Seattle while they're in season, I'd wholeheartedly endorse checking them out. Do you enjoy spring, Jaime? I don't think I've ever seen you go for a splash in the lake, or participate in the annual Laconia Make-Your-Own-Boat Regatta.
Actually, Cal, I prefer autumn. I don't enjoy hot weather, and the pollen here in the spring is a nightmare. I'm the type to prefer staying at home with blankets and a hot cup of coffee over anything else, which is probably why I've never actually been to the regatta before.
Oh my god. Golly gosh gee willikers. Hot damn. Jaime, my dearest friend in the whole wide world, you haven't been to the regatta before? You have got to go this year. I'll drag you there myself if I have to. Do you know how many childhood memories I have there? I tried to sail a cardboard box one year. A cardboard box! Mike told me there was no way in hell it would work, but it actually held up a good few minutes before it sank. So, shows what he knows.
Cal, you know if you bully our sound engineer of the station, we won't have a show anymore.
Like that's important when you haven't been to the best event in the history of this town. I'm sure Mike agrees with me anyways. How have you lived here for years without going?
I'd be careful claiming that's the best event in the history of this town. There used to be an unofficial train hopping competition, you know?
Wait, what the hell? How do you know more about the town history than I do? I grew up here.
I asked around.
Just asked around?
I might have had a tray of homemade muffins on me at the time, perhaps?
Bribery! You hear that, folks? Jaime Gonzales is a baked goods enchanter. Watch out for your secrets and your crops, or he'll ensorcel them away from you in no time. To be fair, he'd probably put said crops to good use. I've seen the food he brings in for lunch, and let me say, I am jealous.
I wouldn't go that far. Oh, looks like it's time to start our scheduled programming.
You're avoiding the accusations! Anyway, folks, if you stick with us through this ad break, we'll get started on today's news in just a second. And welcome back, folks. With that out of the way, it's time to get into some news. First off, remember to drop by the bonfire this Saturday near the lighthouse for food, music, and more. Our headliner this year is local band The Trenches, with supporting acts of karaoke and whatever party mix someone slaps on. For our Pet Patrol update, if anyone still somehow doesn't know Annabeth's cats, we've posted recent pictures of the two of them on the show's Twitter account. So please, let us know via call or DM if you see them, as she seems to have lost them. Again. And one last thing before we move into our big news. Don't forget to tune in tomorrow night for our ghost hunting segment. We have some very interesting stories for you and a special in-person investigation courtesy of Mr. Crampton. So we'll see you. Wait a second. Jaime seems to be doing some interpretive dance over there in the booth. Or maybe, more likely, someone's called in. Though we don't usually interrupt the show, unless... And here he is now. What news do you bring our darling listeners today, Jaime?
Kal, are you sure you want to hear this on air?
If it's news for our listeners, then of course I want to hear it.
They found Courtney Sybil.
What? As in, they found his body?
No, he's alive. Apparently, a few hikers on the Iron Horse Trail found him wandering near Snoqualmie Tunnel. He's covered in muck with bloody roots growing through his skin and shit, and really fucking shaking up. Sort of like a zombie, but alive.
Did you have to phrase it like that? We have kids listening, man.
Hey, that's how the caller phrased it. And I didn't exactly have time to think of anything better.
Fair enough. Well, it appears we'll be cutting to music for about a half hour, dear listeners, while we head to the scene of this exciting new development to give you the latest updates on Courtney's miraculous return. Back in a few, folks. I really thought he was dead, you know? We all did. I mean, Jaime, you moved here just after, but Rosa, you know how it was. 3 years in the fucking woods with no sign of him? Even search and rescue had given up on him. I knew his mom still occasionally ran a search party, but no one really thought there was anything left for her to find. We went to elementary school together. He was 2 years older, so we were never in the same classes or anything. But we had the same recess for a few years. We were some of the only kids from Laconia there, but it didn't make us friends. What do you think they meant about the roots growing through his skin? Like, Did he get a shit ton of splinters, or are there plants literally growing out of him?
Ay, Dios mío, calma ya, Katimor, but when I'm trying to drive.
Sorry, Rosa.
Mike texted. He said to let him know when we get there so he can double check that the portable equipment is broadcasting correctly.
Ay, lovely. Okay, well, I will drop you two off here with the equipment while I find somewhere to park. I am so not looking forward to having to dodge the crowd, though, that's for sure.
Welcome back, listeners. We're here on site at Snoqualmie Pass Fire and Rescue Station number 47, which has been sworn by bystanders. We don't know much about what happened, where he's been, or why he was standing in front of the Snoqualmie tunnel, but Courtney Sybil has been found. You heard that right. Courtney Sybil, after having been missing for 3 years, has been found. It's hard to see through the crowd, but it seems like Cal's finally convinced one of the rangers here to give a statement. We're hoping to interview Courtney himself, but from what I've heard, he hasn't said anything since he was found. Otherwise, he appears unharmed. If you ignore the roots, of course. Hopefully, Cal's interview with the ranger will get us more concrete information. Passing it to Cal now, dear listeners. Stay tuned.
Hello there, listeners! I'm Kal Lichowski with the Laconia broadcast, and I'm here today with this lovely park ranger who has generously agreed to give us a statement on the sudden reappearance of Courtney Sybil. Would you like to introduce yourself? And how do you think Courtney survived the woods for 3 years after disappearing completely, only to be found alive and well?
Sorry. Cal, we can't disclose much information as the situation is currently ongoing.
Really? 'Cause I heard Courtney was found with bloody roots growing out of his skin. Care to comment?
Look, all I can say is this. Some hikers found him wandering the woods, looking grimy as anything and mumbling incoherently under his breath. They called us, and then we called ALS, and Courtney hasn't said a word since they arrived.
So he was still mumbling when you got there? What was he saying?
He kept saying weird stuff about the columns, you know? The ones around the old amphitheater?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those. And this was so scratchy, it almost sounded like static.
Very helpful, Morrah. Now, is there any way we could speak to him? Not as a formal interview or anything, just to officially confirm to our listeners that it is, without a doubt, Courtney Sybil.
I don't think that's a great idea, Cal. If I'm being honest, Courtney's really delicate.
Thank you for handling Call Me here, Morrah, but our professional judgment is that Mr. Sybil is in no state to be receiving visitors, let alone those of a journalistic type like the Laconia broadcast here. Now, Call Me, our official statement is that this is indeed Mr. Sybil, though he hasn't spoken a word since the ambulance arrived. We'll be transferring him to Snoqualmie Valley Hospital for observation, which is where any of your listeners who feel so inclined can send their care packages and cards.
Oh, of course.
Now, we're about to move him over to the ambulance, so if you could all just take a step back from me, that'd be mighty fine of you. We don't want to crowd him, understand?
Crystal.
Courtney, it's just a few more steps to the ambulance and then you can lie down.
You.
All right. Courtney, what do you mean by that?
You're the reason I'm dead! I trusted you, and you killed me!
Courtney.
I could feel cold dirt pressing against my bare bones, like a hand pressed to a hot stove. I could feel myself trying to think with a dead mind. Do you know how much that hurts? Do you know what it feels like when thinking is like clawing against rubber? Do you, Cal?
Thank you for keeping your listeners updated, Kalmia, but we have this under control.
Ah, right. The years alone must have done a number on him, clearly. Anyway.
Get back here, Courtney! What the fuck?
Kal, are you okay?
Let me go! What are you doing? Why are you protecting them? They're the ones who did this to me!
Christ, Colin. We can get a bandage on that in the ambulance.
I can't believe the fucker bit me!
Kal?
Yeah, I'm alright. We lost Courtney Sybil to the woods today. Courtney was a real friend and an asset to the station, and it pains me to think of the end he must have faced. Courtney is survived by his mother, Mrs. Delora Sybil. If you wish to bring her casseroles or a shoulder to cry on, do not, I repeat, do not look to her home, as she is currently detained and is being held in the town hall. Mrs. Sybil, if you are listening, I would like to extend my deepest condolences. Now, dear listeners, it would mean the world if you would join me in a brief moment of silence, taken in memory of Courtney. Now, on an entirely different note, I've heard some of you have been experiencing outages in our broadcast. We apologize for any interruptions in our programming. It seems our signal was snagged on a bit of interference for a second there. It looks like it's resolved itself for now, so without further ado, let's continue on to the weather.
Well, Kal, it seems the known hotspots are hungry for blood today, especially around the Iron Horse area. We know about Courtney, of course, but local park ranger Morrah Michaels has also reported that the dunes a half-mile from town have been experiencing rapid violent changes over the morning and early afternoon. Mr. Michaels first noticed these changes when he saw a person's shadow on the sand reaching out to him at around noon. The shadow then reportedly exploded in a spray of blood and viscera originating from the space where their hand would have been, coating the area and seeping into the sand. Additionally, Mr. Michael's shirt was ruined. The sight was described as close to what you'd imagine would happen if you pushed a human being through a cheese grater with incredible force. It was horrible. There was blood everywhere and bits floating on the top of blood, like the worst gazpacho you've ever seen. End quote. The blood-soaked sand reportedly turned to glass a few minutes later, and the violent cracking was heard around 1 p.m. before it burst violently outwards, like the bulb of a Prince Rupert's robe, shattering as the tail breaks. Mr. Michaels described the rupture as sounding like a dying animal screaming in pain, a desperate keening wail with the broken edge of a throat hoarse from sea salt. It was that kind of sound that cuts through any kind of thought, the kind that rings in your ears until you forget who you are. I wasn't me. For just a second, I was a woman with a surfboard and long black hair, and I was terrified. Mr. Michaels declined to speak any further on his experience, but I believe his statement likely confirms the whereabouts of Aiting Lee, who was last sighted a week and a half ago strapping her surfboard to the top of her car by her neighbors.
Our best wishes to Miss Lee's loved ones. If you have any further information on her whereabouts, please contact the station through a phone call or the Laconia broadcast Tumblr. Now, Jaime, are there any other places our listeners should take care to avoid today?
As always, avoid the hotspots. The Snoqualmie Tunnel and the coast remain as dangerous as ever. Besides that, we'll be getting a cloudy day with a dash of rain here at the end, so don't forget those umbrellas, fellas.
Thank you. You're always so knowledgeable, Jaime. Now, before we take any calls, we have an interview scheduled with a dear guest who's come all the way to the station to educate us on a bit of town history. Everyone, please welcome Annabeth. You might know her as our town's beloved cat lady. Hello, Annabeth. And if you don't mind me asking, how are your cats today?
They are doing just fine, dear. This town has a bit of a stray problem, actually. I keep finding the poor things wandering around. I do worry about them. The little darlings. It's not as if they have Jaime's weather updates to tell them where to avoid. So, I take in as many as I can and resign myself to fretting over the rest.
Your kindness is an inspiration to us all, Miss Mayberry. Now, you were also kind enough to agree to come here to talk about how Laconia has changed over the years. As residents go, I'm sure you have an above-average amount of tales to tell.
You are just too sweet, Kal. To be honest, this town's had more than its fair share of superstitions for as long as I can remember. People have always gone missing, more than usual around here, but the woods are dark and the trees are thick, and most folks just shrugged it off as another clueless fool wandering off unprepared. I had a friend growing up, a boy 3 years older than me, who lived down the block. His name was Peter, and one day when we were out looking for frogs to catch by the creek, he disappeared. It was the oddest thing. 1 second he was there in front of me, and the next he had never been there at all. I was left standing with the frog in my hands and a space where nothing had ever been. But I knew something or someone had just been there. I marched right on home. Well, I let the frog go first, but I knocked on my door and demanded that my mother tell me who my friend was. She got a strange look in her eye, like she did when she was thinking about something very complicated, and said she wasn't sure.
What did you do then?
I looked for him, of course, and I didn't find much of anything until I stumbled upon the little diary I kept trying to write in, like I saw big girls do in the movies. I was never much of a journaler. One of the entries mentioned that Peter and I were going to go to the movies with our parents next week, and I was very excited about it. It was a sheer chance I wrote about him at all, really. There must have only been 4 or 5 entries in total, but I had found him. I remembered going to the movies with my mother and her friend, Mrs. Crompton, but I didn't know anyone named Peter, so I thought very hard about it and figured he must have been the friend I couldn't remember. Things were so much simpler in those days. Now it's gotten so violent.
Did Peter ever reappear?
No, not as himself, no. There were bits and pieces from his life left scattered around. His room was still the same when I knocked on Mrs. Crompton's door and asked to look through her house. One of the only joys of being a precocious child was that grown-ups found it amusing and liked to humor me. But the most I ever saw of him was something standing at the edge of the woods that wore his face.
Did you try to follow him?
Did I? Of course I did, Kalmia. I ran after him like a shot, but I couldn't catch up. Even as I pushed through a blackberry thicket as fast as I could, ignoring as the hems of my shorts caught and tore on the thorns. He kept dodging his way through the trees. It was graceful, much too graceful for the gangly kid he'd been in the hazy memories I could summon. But I wanted to know, and I wanted my friend back. Oh, but as I burst out of the blackberry thicket, I realized he'd been leading me towards the Snoqualmie tunnel. You could go near the tunnel back in those days. It was beautiful in an empty way, and the world bent towards it when you went near it. Something which amused me deeply as a child, and it terrified many of my classmates. It was suffocating, but not deadly like it is now. No. Peter turned around to me, and I saw he'd also been scratched by the bushes. But where my blood was beading in little red drops around my wrist like a gaudy bracelet, his was deep set, gelatinous maroon, and it wasn't bleeding exactly. More squishing from a gash in his arm as he moved, the pressure pushing clods of blood through like a dripping tree sap. Oh, I turned around and ran as fast as I could, and maybe it was Peter, but even if it was, I didn't want to end up like him. Oh no, that was a corpse. A living one, yes, but a corpse all the same. Thankfully, he didn't try to follow me.
That sounds like a much more peaceful end than what we've seen in recent years.
Yeah, more and more people vanish, and less appear, yes. But it wasn't always this way. Yeah, well, what was it? It was about, 3 years ago that I first noticed things seemed to be changing for the worse. Oh, of course, I don't think any of us want to know how bad it would get without you and Jaime here. The whole town truly appreciates what you two do, what all of you here at the station do.
Oh, I don't know what to say. Thank you, Mrs. Mayberry. I and Jaime, we couldn't do what we do without the support of the town, and the support of everyone else who works behind the scenes. I'm just happy to be able to help.
No, none of that, dear. I brought the whole station a basket of muffins. My treat.
Well, listeners, I'm off for a short break to enjoy Mrs. Mayberry's lovely begging before we take your calls. So remember, lock your doors, close your eyes to the cries of old friends, and keep listening. Apologies for the unscheduled break in our live programming, listeners. Hopefully you haven't gotten too bored of the top 40 hits. We experienced some, technical difficulties regarding the interview in which our equipment was banged up a titch. Luckily, nothing was broken too badly, but that, along with some other complications, meant that we had to put our program on hold. As a quick reminder before we sign off for the night, tomorrow night is our monthly ghost hunting special. This one's a real treat and includes a live spook spotting expedition, so make sure not to miss it. And good night, Laconia!